Thank you very much. A very good afternoon and welcome back. You know, lunch is beautiful, but it can also be a handicap. But I think we have a group of panelists will make sure that post-lunch blues are placed in the right place. First and foremost, I'd like to thank ISAS, Director Taeyong, Shanti, first for having me here, but I think more important for having a very timely conference on the subject of great importance. In fact, I'm also touched, as we mentioned earlier, by the ability of the Institute to bring so many Afghans together under one roof to discuss something of mutual importance for themselves and of course with great implication for all of us. Now, just 2 or 3 minutes, I'd like to take the opportunity, Singaporean here, why is this being held here? I think the keynote address, the chairman GPC made some points clear. Just to reiterate and to put the whole thing into context. One, Afghanistan, as an international security issue, have in fact hitting us for a very long time. And it's not just because of the importance of the stakeholders, but also many of them were also nuclear powers. So what happens there is not just merely an Afghan affair, it has implications for many of us, including those in Southeast Asia, and particularly those from Southeast Asia, including Singapore. There are 2 very unique dimensions worth bearing in mind when we talk about the Afghan problem. One is the Islamic Muslim Brotherhood which exists. Afghanistan is an Islamic majority nation. In Southeast Asia we have 3 members who are in the OIC, and therefore there's that particular affinity. So what happens there is of great implications, both in terms of state politics, but also I think in terms of domestic politics. But number 2, of late, is the issue of terrorism. The Al-Jama'ah Al-Islamiyah was born in Afghanistan, in particular in Kandahar and Kosh. And number 2, the Abu Sayyaf group, based in Philippines, and which do have collaboration with some groups in Indonesia, Malaysia, takes its name from Rasul Sayyaf, again an Afghan leader of a Mujahideen group during the Soviet period. So it is very much at home here. Number 3, and a small final point, Singapore of late has begun to play a much more important role. At least from our perspective, it's not as big as the others, but we are involved in a very token form in the stabilization program, and our armed forces, or security personnel to be more specific, are involved there, are deployed there, and we don't see them, we do see them being deployed there for a while to come. So it's in the interest of all of us to see things turn towards a positive spin from now to 2014 and beyond. Now, yesterday and this morning, we heard again and again 2 central themes being repeated. One, the importance of domestic politics in Afghanistan, okay, and how it has brought about impact, implication, and where in terms of directions of what's happening, and whether you can take a pro or contra position. The centrality of domestic politics is very critical. Number 2, and you cannot run away, and this is a historical fact, is the geopolitical significance of Afghanistan. Afghanistan can be 6 different states, longest border with Pakistan, 2,600 kilometers plus, and the shortest one, China, 76 kilometers. So whether you like it or not, geopolitically, it is a critical stage. What we are doing this afternoon is we want to hear perspectives. What are the regional, international perspective as far as what's happening in Afghanistan We know what has happened. History is important. But today we are at a critical crossroad. From now to 2014, how will the transition be played out? What end game are we talking about? What end state are we talking about? Okay, and from 2014 and beyond. And the panelists are basically called upon in their own ways, from their own perspective, to share with us a future oriented outlook. How do the Chinese, the Indians, the Americans, and then of course we have the Afghan paper, look in terms of how these things are going to evolve, because what eventually transforms itself will have got dire consequences for all of us, of course most importantly for the Afghan themselves. Now, just like Afghanistan is in a flux, so is this panel. Mr. Haroun Mir is not able to be with us, but his paper is. And we are in fact most honored and pleased that Mr. Hassid has decided to present his paper briefly. And of course later on he will share his perspective wherever possible. Secondly, for personal reason, Professor Rasul Rais is also not with us this afternoon. So what we have is, or rather, 4 presentations. I will still like to insist, if you can, as much as possible, try to keep your presentation within 20 minutes. Now, their full bio data have been attached. What I'll just briefly mention is, when I introduce them, each at a time, there's one liner, and from them the floor is theirs. Now, Mr. Haroun's paper will be read by Mr. Hassid. I think he's already a familiar figure with us. You heard him in the last panel. So I think from that note, can I have Mr. Hassid to give a presentation? I think the paper is titled, "Is a Regional Consensus on Afghanistan Possible?" The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I am not Haroun Mir, I'm Civil Mahit, and I'm here by popular demand, as you can see. Filling in for Haroun. Before coming here, he did give me a call telling me that he won't be able to make it, and then yesterday I had Shanti requesting that if I could read his paper or brief at least parts of that paper. And I'll do that. I'll try my best to be honest to his remarks, to the point of view he has expressed through the paper and the process there. I do understand that there may be things that I may state in a different way. I'll try to say where's my opinion, where's Haroun's paper. That difference I'll illustrate out there. Basically, the discussion Haroun is presenting in his paper, and I'll read you the crux of it, is that Afghanistan, the region as a whole, there has always been a sense, specifically after the Obama administration took over, that one needs to find a regional solution to the Afghanistan conundrum. And there were efforts made in that regard. We had the Office of the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan set up with a mandate to try to secure some level of regional coherence for a stabilization of Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan, if you will, now. And those efforts, while now about 2 or 3 years old, have produced rather minimal to no results. Regional relationships, security arrangements, all of them remain complicated. There are people working pretty much against each other's interests, and they're mostly based on what Haroun, Professor Weinbaum, and in a brief part myself were part of the process back in 2009, 2010, where there was an exercise to try and see if regional actors around Afghanistan, and if I could name those, the countries Haroun deems important for any regional framework for Afghanistan, they include Pakistan, Iran, the immediate neighbors, the Central Asian republics of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan by extension, and then Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and Turkey. That's the list of countries that, in our own viewpoint, are crucial for any regional framework for the country. There was an exercise that tried to see if these countries do share common interests, in Afghanistan, or at least the common perception of the threat, be it emanating from Afghanistan or a threat that could be foreseen down the line by virtue of looking at how the events in Afghanistan will shape. Now that exercise eventually produced the conclusion that there are no common interests in Afghanistan for regional countries. And Haroun's paper builds on that. And perception of threat, as Dr. Singh mentioned, varies. Some countries in the region do have a sense of a heightened perception from the threat that a destabilized Afghanistan would pose. Other countries do look at some level of just lack of stability in Afghanistan as serving their interests, and then there are certain countries who have absolute interest in destabilization and progress of Afghanistan. So all these variables play a role in making it very hard to build coherence and a regional framework that could yield stability in Afghanistan. The efforts, again, led by the Office of the Special Representative for the Afghanistan and Pakistan out of the US, I'm sure Professor Whiteman will speak in great details about it. They've pretty much remained efforts at this stage. And there was a lot of hype around the summit last year, towards the end of the year in Istanbul, where it was projected that the countries from the region, the ones I listed, will come up with a sense of commitment to not interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan and create some distance from destabilizing actors. That commitment did not come. In fact, some people boycotted the summit, and eventually it was a very much the talk was good, but the walk hasn't been seen since then. Overall, Haroun does argue that the opportunities have been missed over the past 10 years, including early on in after 2001. There was I myself was privy to certain discussions with people involved in the first Bonn Accord, where there was a lot of willingness from Iran, specifically the government under President Khatami, to try to come to certain accommodations with the US on Afghanistan. They seem to have been cooperating early on. Eventually, coming to 2002, 2003, that cooperation got reduced, and essentially Iran got turned into another actor that found some parts of its interest aligned with the destabilization of Afghanistan, or at least hindering the process led by the United States in order to project some level of influence against US presence in the region. So those are the main missed opportunities that Haroun highlights. He does give you a sense of what are the regional, how does the relationships of Afghanistan with regional actors stand right now. With Pakistan, obviously, and the list goes, again, I'll start with Pakistan. It's a relationship that is crucial, that's significant both in terms of security as well as economic impacts in the country, but one that's pretty much marked by adversity, marked by different layers of misunderstanding between the two countries, as well as the different designs, specifically from Pakistan, as Haroun argues. And that in his argument, he says that especially within the past couple of years, 2 or 3 years, the president of Afghanistan, the government, have tried to find a way to accommodate Pakistan's concerns. Tried to build certain friendly relationships with Pakistan, but eventually have hit a wall and have failed to both show any gains for it to the local public, who are more wary of any level of proximity or to Pakistan that doesn't match the rhetoric of it, doesn't match reality on the ground. And then on India specifically, and Haroun's argument and overall is that the relationships between Afghanistan and India are deep. They go back to many different periods in history. Since 2001, there has been significant Indian investment in destabilization of Afghanistan. India has built a new parliament, is investing in higher education and in many other critical sectors. Afghanistan has just recently signed a strategic agreement with India that's long-term and that does include some level of even security cooperation between the two countries. With Iran, Haroun's argument is that, again, it's a country that has historic ties with Afghanistan, does have a lot of access to Afghanistan both politically and economically, and that Iran has multiple layers or multiple instruments of influence in the country. They include certain specific sectors, or if you will, groups of the demographics in Afghanistan. But that over time, while there is a sense that Iran may benefit from an Afghanistan that's not controlled by the Taliban, and because at least in 1998, the two countries, the Taliban controlled Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran, were very much on the verge of a conflict, of a war. Haroun also argues that over time Iran has found interest in trying to play a double role in Afghanistan. Both one of contributing to some level of central government strength, working with the palace, working with ministries, and even civil society or education institutions in the country, but it's also at least alleged to be supplying either arms or some level of support to insurgents in particular parts of the country. The argument Haroun makes is that the negative side of the Iranian involvement in the country is mostly pegged to the U.S. presence, and that it's meant to both signal to the U.S. that Iran has leverage should it ever try to play hardball with Iran, that Iran could squeeze the U.S. in Afghanistan. That's the Iran. Central Asian republics, it's a mixed picture. There is growing proximity with certain republics such as Tajikistan, or with Turkmenistan has always been an ambivalent relationship between Afghanistan and them. And there is, again, the main sticking point in that relationship is the narcotics trade. Many of those countries always, specifically with help from Russia, object to the growth of the opium in Afghanistan as transfer and trade. A share of it through the northern corridor, through Central Asian republics. With Saudi Arabia, overall, the relationship is mostly between Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia is influenced through a religious lens. Dates back, the depth of the relationship, especially with actors now prominent in the country, dates back to the anti-Soviet jihad era, when Saudi Arabia was a major actor alongside the United States and Pakistan in mobilizing as well as resourcing Afghan anti-Soviet fighters, and they have continued to keep their links to those parties. In some shape or form they are supporting them, but overall the Saudis have been pretty much have kept their own agenda, and that is much more influenced by a notion of the religion that they, a brand of Islam, the Wahhabism, that in many ways they try to channel to the country, to Afghanistan, where it is rather alien, at least until now. With China, the relationship again has been one of a lot more commerce-oriented. The market in Afghanistan overall is pretty much flooded with Chinese products and Chinese goods. It is a positive impact because people can access things, but the negative impact again is it's pretty much hindering any competition from local economy. Nothing locally, including clothes, and I tend to give the example of we have a particular, you know, probably know this thing called the Afghan, a dress that ladies wear outside Kabul mainly, but in Kabul in functions. Normally it used to be produced by the female tailors, and it was a source of income. Now it's very elaborate, it has a lot of stitching and a lot of embroidery in it. Now even the Afghan gun gets imported from China, where the production price, while even the transport costs, pretty much forced anybody added to all, bring it to a price where it forces any local competition out of the market. The depth of the Chinese-Afghan relationship again is underscored by recent mining contracts around mining. China overall has remained outside the security discussions about Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there is a sense that China may have some preference for the Pakistani line, but that they also have now investments in Afghanistan that they do not want to see compromised with any stability. So with the specifically recent investments, both in the Ainak copper mine in Logar province, over $3 billion of investment, and then recently about $700 million up north in the Amudarya Basin oil deposits. The Chinese now have a significant economic footprint in the country that will impact their future role. On Russia, specifically, Russia again, as Russia's role, Haroun has outlined in a more regional perspective, that Russia continues to have leverage over Central Asian republics and their dealings with Afghanistan and specifically with the international military presence. Now with the constraints imposed by Pakistan on the supply routes to international troops in Afghanistan, the northern neighbors of Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and others are becoming much more central to the fight that's ongoing, and there is an ongoing negotiation oftentimes between NATO, Afghanistan, and the Russian Republic, as well as Central Asian countries on access, availability of access. Another major regional actor Haroun has outlined briefly is Turkey. Turkey, as we all know, is increasingly becoming more prominent in both in the Middle East as well as in Central Asia and South Asia. It is projecting its influence, building routes. Previously, the Turkish influence in Afghanistan was mainly limited to a specific actor within the security apparatus as well as a specific group of people, but now over time they've sought to diversify that. They are now trying to bridge certain gaps between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Istanbul process, if you will, or Istanbul summits have become a catchy process out there. And broadly speaking, Turkey is also projecting soft influence in Afghanistan through a school system called we call it the Afghan Turk, the Afghan Turk. A lot of people go through it. Elite schools produces people who, the majority of them do end up leading sectors in both the economy and the government. So those were an outline of how Haroun has sees regional actors and their importance, their role in Afghanistan. The reasons for regional diplomacy that he has outlined again were that pursuit of some level of coherence and some level of a regional framework for stabilization. The conclusion he has reached is that was just impossible, wasn't going to happen, and hasn't happened. What is likely in the future? The sense that I'll be brief, I'll project this quite quickly, is that Haroun tends to think that Afghanistan going to 2014 and beyond needs to look at regional actors in two categories. One category is the spoilers, the other one is the potential partners. And the spoilers, because Afghanistan aspires to proximity to the United States and Western capitals, both in terms of strategic partnerships and also India, and economic as well as security pacts, that countries such as Pakistan and Iran will have trouble accommodating that choice Afghanistan is going to make. And thus they will seek to keep destabilizing instruments within their arsenal, be it Taliban or be it something else tomorrow that they'll create should the Taliban reconcile. That's Haroun's argument. And then the other is the potential partners, and he outlines India, China, and Central Asian republics, and as well as Turkey, as nations where there is a great deal of potential both for commerce as well as political cooperation between the Afghanistan and those specific countries. Beyond that, again, is Haroun does present a very, in a way, gloomy picture of where both relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan are headed, but more specifically what's happening in Pakistan and its impact on the region. Both the energy crisis in that country, the growth of population, as well as political instability, but more primarily the fact that radicalization, once used as an instrument of policy, is now coming back to haunt the system in Pakistan, is going to be troubling both for the region, but will have effects on how Pakistan shapes its policies towards Afghanistan and places itself in the region. Now, another says, and he doesn't touch on Iran, what Iran is likely to do down the line. It pretty much depends on the Iran and the US relationship. Should it deteriorate, Iran will seek to try and activate actors such as a Afghan form of Hezbollah, if you will. That's the Haroun argument, the proxy force that will be in the service of certain Iranian interests. Haroun argues that it's a design or a hope that Iran may have had over time, but to the sectors of the demographic, to the population areas that Iran had access, where it could have activated such a force against the NATO forces in Afghanistan or Iran, that possibility is increasingly reduced because that demographic has benefited tremendously from both the US presence and the NATO presence in the country. That's pretty much for Haroun's paper. I hope I've been true to it and that I've captured most of his arguments. Again, generally, the crux of his argument is that the pursuit of a regional framework where you will have both a common perception of threat as well as shared interest is just futile. It's unlikely to be there, and the way to go is to have both bilateral agreements with certain regional actors are both around the spoilers and insurances, both with them and against them, as well as with the cooperative actors, some level of cooperative agreements, and then augmenting that or enforcing it through outside the region arrangements, be it with the United States or with European capitals. That's about it, and I'll get to answer any questions that we can. Thank you.
Thank you for helping us out. Really appreciate it. A couple of bullet points, but I think we will not go through them now. In the interest of time, it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Xuecheng Liu. Yeah, right. He's a Senior Research Fellow and Executive Vice President, Center for China-US Relations, China Institute for International Studies. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I come here and talk about the future of the Afghan transition, particularly beyond 2014. So this is a question is really difficult to address. But anyway, personally, I try to on my academic experience. I think with the phased withdrawal of the US-led NATO International Security Assistance Force by 2014, so far, all the Afghan domestic forces are struggling to seek their political and military gains in the future of Afghanistan. Major external powers are attempting to shape the Afghanistan's future in their own ways. The Afghanistan's transition beyond 2014 will face great uncertainty and experience the scenarios we may not be expecting so far. A secure and stable Afghanistan is really A secure and stable Afghanistan is crucial to peace and stability of the region. We neighbors of Afghanistan have more and greater stakes for a secure and stable Afghanistan. The future of Afghanistan depends first on the Afghan people, but Afghan needs strong support from the international community to achieve its goals of national reconstruction. The international community should continue to bear its historic responsibility and honor its commitments to Afghanistan with concrete actions and measures. Really, I try to address very briefly the outline of this paper. The first, very briefly, and what gains we have achieved in the anti-terror war in Afghanistan. The first, there are 5 points. The first, terrorist group Al-Qaeda has been disposed, and its several top leaders, including bin Laden, were killed. Today's Afghanistan is not a haven for international terrorist groups. The second point. But on the transitional phase of national reconstruction, supported certainly, go to the second part already, a little faster. The third point, Afghanistan has an elected parliament and functioning government and local governing institutions under orderly restructuring. The fourth point, the international community is ready to work with Afghanistan in its national reconstruction. The fifth point, political reconciliation by initiating peace negotiations with Taliban groups are underway. Then go to the second part. What scenario is the third part? What obstacle we are facing in Afghanistan today? There are 4 points. The first, as our friends talked about yesterday, weak government and strong insurgency still there. The second, for my understanding, worsening relationship between US and important neighbors, particularly Pakistan and Iran. The third point, the complete destruction of the infrastructure in this country and general poverty there. The fourth point, drug problems. I don't want to address further. The third part, what scenarios we might be experiencing beyond 2014. Afghanistan's transition beyond 2014 will face great uncertainty and experience 3 possible scenarios, from my understanding. The first scenario is a sovereign and independent Afghanistan with a workable national government recognized by the international community. The second scenario is a Taliban-dominant regime isolated by the international community. The third scenario is the divided country ruled by local warlords and other forces and ignored by the international community. Today, international efforts have focused on creating the first one. However, looking at both the post-Gaddafi situation in Libya and the post-US occupation turmoil in Iraq, and reviewing the post-Soviet withdrawal chaos in Afghanistan, we cannot say today we will be able to avoid second and third scenarios. So the fourth point anyway, the fourth part, what options we may choose for a stable and sustainable Afghanistan transition beyond 2014. Afghanistan people have suffered too much from the decades-long wars, not war, one war, wars. It is a historical responsibility of the international community to support Afghanistan in achieving peace and development at an early date. To succeed in national reconstruction and reconciliation in Afghanistan, there are 3 preconditions the international community should make efforts to establish. They are UN-led peacekeeping mission. The second, the Afghanistan-led regional coordination and cooperation. The third, national government based on political reconciliation. So I want to make some further explanations on that. The first, given the successful case of the UN-led peacekeeping mission in Cambodia in the 1990s, the international community should support the UN in playing a leading role in coordinating international assistance to Afghanistan, ensuring a stable transition in this country. The second, the international community should support an Afghanistan-led and Afghanistan-owned process of regional coordination and cooperation. Respect Afghanistan's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. The international community should respect and accommodate the legitimate interests and concerns of its neighboring countries in this region. A future Afghanistan of sovereign independence will be in the interests of both Afghanistan and the region. The third point, the international community should continue to support Afghanistan in capacity building, even beyond 2014, so that Afghanistan can take over the real responsibility of maintaining peace, security, and stability in this country by helping Afghanistan in advancing political reconciliation through its own efforts. The fourth point, the international community should support Afghanistan in developing the economy and continue to provide generous support and assistance with no political strings attached to bolster Afghanistan's capacity for sustainable development, particularly its infrastructure construction. Then I talk about China's position here, a perspective. China is a friendly neighbor of Afghanistan, has played an active role in supporting and promoting Afghanistan's reconstruction process. Yes, my friend just talked about that. And provide sincere assistance to Afghanistan. President Karzai has visited China 5 times since he assumed his presidency. And the high-ranking officials frequently visited China. So China will working with other partners, not just China itself, continue to take concrete steps to help Afghanistan with its peace reconstruction process and support the development of resources, transport, energy, infrastructure, and other sectors in Afghanistan, and help Afghanistan to develop its own capabilities to develop its own country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu. There was a Chinese perspective, and for not just keeping time, but giving us some extra time. We appreciate that. Next, an extremely old, close friend, more than 30 years. The Indian perspective will be presented by Professor S.D. Muni, presently visiting research professor, Institute of South Asian Studies.
Thank you, Chair. To begin with, thanks for the participation to the Chairman of ISAS and Dr. Shanti for getting me here. Many of you don't know I'm a substitute for somebody, and therefore I lack the wisdom and vision of the original speaker. Kindly bear with me. I'm not giving you India's perspective or the Indian perspective. I want to give you the perspective of an Indian, of what India looks at the transition process. There are 3 parts of my argument. First, about India's stakes in Afghanistan. Secondly, how the transition process looks from New Delhi. And thirdly, what India's specific preferences are in this transition process. So far as India's stakes in Afghanistan are concerned, they go very old. It has just been mentioned. They are very strong civilizational and strategic stakes. Civilizational point of view ranging from Vedic roots, much before Islam, to Bamiyan Buddhism, to Tagore's Kabuliwala, to Bollywood's Khuda Gawah. So you have a whole range of continuing interest. It is necessary to underline it because in many of the conferences, my Pakistani friends tease me by saying what India has to do with Afghanistan. And I retort by saying that India has had to do with Afghanistan much before Pakistan came into existence. So you cannot keep India out. Strategically, Afghanistan is an access to resource-rich Central Asia. Rise of Taliban changed the total strategic context which we still have in mind. Afghanistan is in the neighborhood of two our very principal other neighbors, China and Pakistan. And India has suffered the spillover from Afghanistan of the Al-Qaeda and jihadi terrorism. Virtually no trans-border terrorist group, almost every trans-border terrorist group has had its links with Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan for the past 10 to 15 years that we have been facing. Therefore, India seeks an independent, stable and peaceful, democratic and religiously moderate Afghanistan. But India is not in the forefront of the transition process, largely because it has no direct access to Afghanistan, and secondly because our friend and neighbor Pakistan doesn't want us to do anything there. But somehow, again over the last 5 to 6 years, there has been a very significant shift. India being on the margin of transition is gradually inching towards the core of transition, to an extent that India today is the only country, only neighboring country of Afghanistan with which Afghanistan has a strategic partnership. Now, how does the transition process look from New Delhi? There are 4 critical questions viewed at it from India. First is, what would be the role of international community up to 2014 and beyond 2014? Will a military presence continue? In what form? In what shape? By which countries? Is a very critical question of the US and NATO both. Whether with or without the military presence, the diplomatic and economic support will continue, and in what form? And thirdly, amongst the regional countries, what would be the role of the regional countries? Is there a regional consensus possible to back up whatever happens in Afghanistan after 2014? This is one set of questions which are very critical from New Delhi's point of view. The second set of questions are regarding the power structure in Afghanistan after 2014. Now, in this power structure, yesterday I raised this question. I think one possibility is that the Islamic extremists are isolated and there is a modern national consensus government in Kabul, backed by international community as everybody is desiring that. Whether it would be able to sustain itself, how it will sustain itself, whether political reforms are needed, governance reforms are needed, a whole set of questions are related to that. The second is whether there would be a re-emergence of the extremist Taliban, ELA 1996 and onwards. Perhaps not. I think the character of the Taliban, and this is the question which I raised yesterday, has undergone significant changes. I raised some of the aspects yesterday as to statements. You know, the Taliban leadership now, first, in one way or the other, is detached from Al-Qaeda to some extent. And that makes quite a difference. Secondly, recent development was that the Pakistani Taliban and the Quetta Shura has come closer together. Who brought them? And with an objective that the attacks should be more on the US forces rather than the army of Pakistan or within Afghanistan. What are the implications of this? Mullah Omar came out with an Eid statement in which he made 1 or 2 very significant points. One point was that all ethnic groups will reconcile to the kind of Islamic emirate which he wants to establish. Now, if all ethnic groups have to reconcile, then what would be the shape of the new power structure? And secondly, he said, and I quote him, that the future transformations and developments would not resemble those following the collapse of communism, which means after the Soviet withdrawal. What happened would not be repeated. It's not very clear whether it is tactical or strategy. Does he mean that the kind of Taliban regime which came to Afghanistan would not be there? Therefore, there are very critical questions as to what happens to this group and what it wants to do, what its strategies and tactics would be in order to capture the post-2014 scene in Afghanistan. A critical aspect of this is the negotiations which are going on between the US on the one hand and Taliban on the other. Now, there is a real worry everywhere that if the US cuts a deal quickly and in haste, under an assurance that US would not be harmed by those who govern Afghanistan or those who are in command of Afghanistan, US would like to withdraw. Now, that kind of a hasty deal would have severe implications for Afghanistan and for other neighbors. And this is what, which is a cause of worry to many of the other people. Secondly, many of the regional countries are worried if, as a part of this deal, somehow the Taliban accepts the continuing presence of the US in return of the Taliban coming to the central stage of Kabul. What would be the implications of this? And that's why in the Bonn conference, Russia, Iran, Pakistan and China very strongly resisted the idea of continuing US bases in Afghanistan. But I'm just flagging these issues to say these are the issues which are matters of concern also from New Delhi's point of view, because that would shape the future of the post-2014 Afghanistan. Third question is, will Afghanistan engulf in civil war if there is a hasty decision? Or there would be a proxy regime by one of the neighbors, particularly Pakistan. What would be the shape? So these are some of the questions of transition which are being viewed from New Delhi. What would be New Delhi's response? New Delhi has settled, has realized that the continuing US presence or continuing NATO presence in terms of military involvement has done more harm than good. And therefore, withdrawal is, of course, being seen as a reality. But what would be the shape of this reality? Maybe New Delhi would not be totally averse to a kind of assurance of both military support and economic and political support. But an offensive or an obvious presence which is irritating the neighbors and irritating the groups within Afghanistan would not be acceptable. But continued support of the global community is absolutely essential. I have a quote from the foreign minister, but I can say it about later. This is what the position is. Secondly, New Delhi is very closely monitoring the outcome of Taliban-US negotiations. And that's what I said just now, that any kind of a hasty deal which is worked out purely on the opportunistic terms, where every side looks at its own skin and gets out of it, will be disastrous, both for Afghanistan and for neighbors, particularly India. And India would find it very difficult to accept that. In fact, you would recall that India from the beginning was not very enthusiastic about the negotiations, and the good Taliban and the bad Taliban, these were the terms which were totally opposed. But mind it, in India's own experience, India has talked to the extremists, brought them down on the table and negotiated political settlements with them. And the kind of pace of war, the anti-terror war as it has gone on in Afghanistan, has not been very reassuring. Therefore, political solution is a must, and a political solution cannot come out without negotiations. But it has been officially very clearly stated that such negotiations should be led by the Kabul regime, and they should be on the terms which are acceptable to everybody. It should be a political order which is democratic, plural, which should give up violence, and which must accept a certain rule of law and constitutional mechanism. Beyond that, if any compromises are being made, and the continuing terrorist nursing sanctuaries and institutions are allowed to operate, then that would not be the kind of a solution acceptable, I think, from the broader point of view, as also specifically from India's point of view. Then the third is the question of regional consensus. Now, it has been stated that regional consensus is extremely difficult. It is most desirable way to look at the post-2014 situation, but it is most difficult and most problematic. And this has come out very, very clearly both from Istanbul conference as also in the Bonn conference, where except for the platitudes, nothing really happened in terms of concrete results. But India is still, it has tried even earlier to talk to Iran, to talk to Russia, and now also talking to Pakistan. There are certain shifts which have taken place, if I were to say, in India's position vis-a-vis Iran as also Pakistan. And there are flickers of hope, not really, flickers of hope if moderation takes place on these two countries which have deep stakes, as the first paper told us very clearly. Probably India would be able to work with them. India would want to work with them. In fact, India worked with Russia and Iran earlier when an extremist regime came up in Kabul. But it seems that still the equations are not gelling. The negotiations which India has had with these countries did not bring it to any hopeful outcome. India has quite a convergence of interest with China. In fact, whatever is stated by China. In fact, I have the Chinese Foreign Minister's statement at Istanbul conference, which flags the points which have also been continuously emphasized by India. But the question of Pakistan, there are changes in trade and other matters, and in fact, Pakistan has also accepted that India has a role in Afghanistan. But they say that that role should not go beyond economic development and economic cooperation. So I have some of the Pakistani quotations, including that of Hina Rabbani and Malik, the Home Minister, as also other commentators like Shahri Rahman, who is now the ambassador in the US, saying that Pakistan accepts that India has a role in Afghanistan, but it should not go beyond the developmental aspect. Now, therefore, there are moves on this, but still, there is absolutely no hope of a regional consensus emerging before 2014. One of the main reasons is that there are two basic fault lines strategically. One fault line is US/Iran, China, and Pakistan. And I think this strategic divide is complicating the situation in Afghanistan. And second divide is, of course, perennial between India and Pakistan. And there are many in India who believe that the thaw between India and Pakistan is more tactical. And once the Americans are out of Afghanistan, the army in Pakistan would have a different priority and a different agenda. The whole question of regional consensus, particularly involving Iran and Pakistan, is also vitiated because of internal troubles within Pakistan and within Iran. And the internal forces have so badly been imbalanced that the outcome is not really certain. So this question of regional consensus is very important, but very, very difficult and very problematic. So far as political evolution is concerned, as I said, India is not the front player there and would closely watch and monitor as to what has to be. I know I'm shutting down, please. Yes, I remember. You are very particular to shut me down. Lastly, And lastly, the Indian emphasis is on consolidating its own strategic position in Afghanistan bilaterally. And this is where this strategic partnership agreement has been very critical. India has already invested about $2 billion worth of soft power in terms of infrastructure, development, training, capacity building, governance. As I said, India is the only neighbor which has a security relationship, and is hoping that by indulging in the training exercise, it would have a constituency which would be able to, in the long run, what happens in 3 years is not at all very definitive, because up to 2014, I don't think there would be a huge big goodwill force developed. But on the long run, there would be people who would be able to see the positive contribution by India and support its stakes and interest. But all these calculations by India may be seriously disturbed if there is an extremist regime in Kabul, and whatever the investments are would be seriously jeopardized if there is a regime which is backed by Pakistan, and the army goes back, the army in Pakistan goes back to its old doctrine of having a strategic depth in Afghanistan and controlling Afghanistan in one way or the other. Thank you very much.